Λοιπόν, μπαίνουμε στην τελική ευθεία. Στη συνέχεια θα σας επιτρέψουμε για 2 24 ώρα να μην χρησιμοποιήσετε τη λέξη που αρχίζει από B. Λοιπόν, θα αρχίσουμε με την... Μας λείπει ένας από τους συναδέλφους εδώ, ο Irace. Ναι. Θα αρχίσουμε με την τρίτη keynote lecture. Χαίρομαι πολύ που αυτό το καθήκον το έχει αναλάβει ο Fulvio Irace. Να πω 2 λόγια. Τέλειωσε αρχιτεκτονική στο Πανεπιστήμιο της Νάπολη. Είναι σημαντικό ότι τέλειωσε με τον Ρενάτο Ντεφούσκο και με την αξέχαστη Μαρία Λουίζα Σκαλβίνη, που νομίζω ότι προσδιορίσαν και το δρόμο του προς την ιστορία και την κριτική της αρχιτεκτονικής. Ο Fulvio Irace είναι από το 2000 τακτικός καθηγητής στην ιστορία της αρχιτεκτονικής στο Πολυτέχνικο τη Μιλάνο. Έχει διδάξει σε πολλά πανεπιστήμια και του εξωτερικού, παραδείγματος χάρη στο Princeton University και στην Ακαδημία του Μεντρίζιο. Έχει επιβλέψει εκθέσεις τέχνης και αρχιτεκτονικής στην Ιταλία και στο εξωτερικό. Από το 2005 μέχρι το 2009 ήταν υπεύθυνος αρχιτεκτονικής της Τριενάλε του Μιλάνου. Έχει γράψει και έχει επιμεληθεί μία σειρά βιβλίων για την ιστορία, την ιστοριογραφία και την κριτική της αρχιτεκτονικής και του design του 20ου αιώνα. Έχει γράψει μονογραφίες για τον Νίκολαους Πεύσνερ, για τον Τζο Πόντι, για τον Κάρλο Μολίνο, για τον David Chipperfield, για την Οντίλ Μπεκ. Ναι, ο Ρέντσο Πιάνο φυσικά είναι ένα μόνιμο θέμα. Ναι. Από τις τελευταίες του εκδόσεις θα ήθελα να ξεχωρίσω ένα βιβλίο για τον τρόπο ζωής των αρχιτεκτόνων, «Dove vivono gli architetti», και επίσης «L'architettura dello spazio domestico moderno», είναι ιστορίες των εσωτερικών χώρων, το 2015. Χαίρομαι πολύ που θα έχουμε την ευκαιρία να ακούσουμε τον Fulvio Irace.
Okay. I lost the translation, but thank you very much for what you said. Okay. Thank you. Okay, good evening to everyone. After 3 Italian lectures, I hope you will have the patience to hear the 4th one, but if you will be graceful to me, I promise that I will shortcut the presentation. So you have no choice. Thank you. The title of my lecture is, as you can read over there, it's Bauhaus, the Italian Reception from Chronicles to Myth. And it aims to fill a gap because the 3 lectures that have preceded mine have exactly spoke about the Italian reception of Bauhaus in post-war era. So I'm just going to talk tonight about the reception of the Bauhaus from the beginning till to the end of the Second World War. The beginning means for me 1928, because 1928 was the date of the first exhibition of Italian rational architecture in Rome, of which you can see the poster and the cover of the book. The 1928 was also the year in which Walter Gropius leaves the Bauhaus And coming back to Italy again, 1928 was the year in which two important modern magazines were founded. One was Domus, this is the cover of the first issue, January 1928, and the other magazine was La Casa Bella. As you may understand, both the magazine have in the title sort of main target of their being, which means the domus, the Roman version for the word house, and the other one is La Casa Bella, the beautiful house. With the opening of these two magazines, in a certain sense, it was opened and created in Italy a new information market on architecture, trying to fill the gap between Italy and Europe, what had happened since the beginning of the century. And in fact, in 1926, at the end, December 1926, so just let's say 1 year before, as we say in Italy, as the scientific literature uses to say, it was founded in Italy, in Milano, the first cell of Italian rationalist avant-garde, which was called Gruppo Sette, the group of the seven. You can read the name over there, among which maybe one of the most famous is Giuseppe Terragni, together with Luigi Figini and Gino Pollini. And just to understand why it was necessary in 1928 for two new magazines to be founded about modern architecture, they had to publish their first manifesto, as you can read, Gruppo Sette, Architettura, on a literary magazine, which was called Rassegna Italiana. So it was not an architectural magazine, but a generic magazine. So they had to write over there. But for a strange case of life, it can be said that somehow Italy had a consistent participation in the life of the Bauhaus through three eccentric and different figures of three guys. The first of one is Alfredo Bartoluzzi, was a painter. You can see it on the extreme left of the screen in the box. Three Bauhaus Häusler, born in Italy or born in Germany from Italian family, who were the height to till now only known Italian participants to the adventure of Bauhaus. So the first one was Alfredo Bartoluzzi. The second one was a guy born in Trieste, Augusto Cernigoi. You see a portrait of the artist in jeans in 1928, and on the right, some of his works inspired to the ideology and the iconography of the new Bauhaus, to the technique of collage. And the third one was Ivo Pannaggi, mostly famous because of his adherence to the futuristic program by Marinetti, who also celebrated a small exhibition in Macerata in central Italy on the Bauhaus, about his experience of Bauhaus. And the figure that is in the middle, it's Walter Gropius as depicted by him. And on the other side, one of his paintings of that period called the Builders, I Costruttori. But another important connection with the adventure of Bauhaus, so some of its eminent characters, first of all, Walter Gropius, was due to the an Italian futuristic painter, Fortunato De Pero, who was from Trento. He gave him to a young architect, Gino Pollini, who was one of the founders of the group of the seven. He presented him with two books. One was the Vers une architecture by Le Corbusier, which had recently come out in 1923, and the other, even more recent, in 1925, was Internazionale Architektur, the first of the Bauhaus Bucher series. Gino Pollini always declared in his memory the profound impression given on the shift of his career and his vocation to architecture by these two books, but what these two books meant for them. And in a very short span of time, so we are speaking from the January 1927 to 1928, with the birth of the Italian rational movement, declared Italian rational movement. They started what a journalist and a critic, a very important architectural critic called Carlo Belli, called the Italian Ottobria Revolution, the revolution of Italian rationalism, which fortunately, or unfortunately, I don't know, but unlike the Russian reference, it caused no bloodshed or social revolution. Also because one of the most active members of this group of the Sevens, who was an architect, Carlo Enrico Rava, was the son of a senior colonial officer, Maurizio Rava. So he was very much used to the art of the diplomacy. He was very well introduced in a sort of cosmopolitan ambience, and therefore acquainted with the ways and the stratagem of international diplomacy. In a short time, Carlo Enrico Rava managed to adeptly and tactfully weave an extraordinary network of acquaintances, doing the work of a propaganda for a movement of absolute beginners, because these members of this group, Gruppo dei Sette, they were already students at the Politecnico di Milano, so they did not even had a proper degree to exercise architecture, but they were very ambitious, even sleeky maybe somehow, because they, in order to project the newborn Italian group in the European avant-garde context, they soonly understood that the first thing to do was to use diplomacy to get the Gruppo Sette trademark enter in the annals of European patents of the avant-gardes, together with the other, including, of course, the Bauhaus, which occupied a position of absolute prestige. Here you can see a postcard and a text of a letter that I found in files of Gino Pollini, which are in the archive of the Mart Architectural Museum, which shows exactly the strategy of this diplomatic attack, very suasive attack, very soft, very gentle, but very effective. Walter Gropius, in fact, together with his French master and colleague Corbusier, were chosen as privileged interlocutors by Carlo Rava. On the 21st January of 1927, he wrote a letter to Walter Gropius that was very soon published on the magazine Bauwelt with the title Mitteilungen aus Mailand, in which it was announced to the world of the avant-garde. It was the February the 3rd of 1927 that a new group of brave men was born in Italy, and their aim was to support the concept of the existence of an international architecture. I mean, you would notice that this reference to international architecture is a very captive one, because it makes reference to Gropius' ideas. Rava also announced in this letter the tools through which it was intended to continue this campaign of rational proselytism in Italy, citing articles in the magazine La Rassegna Italiana, but mostly announcing their participation as group in the Esposizione Internazionale di Arti Decorative, which is the international exhibition of decorative arts, to be held in the Villa Reale Monza, which was the so-called Biennale di Monza, with the setting up of a room with drawings and models of, he says, mainly industrial architecture. The letter concluded with an invitation to the editorial staff of Bauwelt to start a systematic and intense exchange of documents, of photographs, of articles, with which to establish a new alliance between the new Italian architecture and the German version. On the same day, Rava was reiterating the contents of his letter to the Berlin magazine Wasmut Monatshefte für Baukunst, directed by Werner Hegmann, and to the French magazine L'Architecture Vivante, directed by Jean Baldovisi. But above all, he was drafting another, more demanding missive to Walter Gropius, addressing it to Das Bauhaus in Dessau. And he says, I'm quoting, I think you can read it on the screen. He says, my distinguished architects, you can really understand since from the beginnings this idea, my distinguished architects. You know, it's a masterpiece of diplomacy. I mean, Carlo Enrico Rava was an absolutely unknown man in the world. So he says, my distinguished architect, a group of young architects which I founded, he was not actually the founder, with the name of Gruppo Sette, has recently been constituted in Milan. Our aim is to spread the principle of a strictly logical and rational architecture throughout Italy, where there is still much obstruction, stripped of a decorative artifice, and even more, to defend the idea of the existence of an international architecture. So you can understand that he is provocatively using these terms. We want to prove the existence of an international architecture because he's making exactly reference to the first Bauhaus book, which was written by Gropius in 1925 with exactly this title of Internazionale Architektur. And then he continued. In addition to the sincere admiration that we have for our own masterful architecture, we know what an important influence it exercises on the whole of the Germany architectural environment. So he has understood the central pivotal position of Walter Gropius, and as a good diplomat, he says, I want to negotiate with you in order to, let's say, enter through your help in the circles of the avant-garde. Thus, it is with great satisfaction that we saw in your brief study, which appeared in Internazionale Architektur, ideas expressed that are absolutely similar to those which form part of our upcoming article. So this is interesting. He's putting himself in an equal position as Frank Lloyd Wright. So he said, not properly you're copying our ideas, but he's saying for a strange case of life, we can see that we are on the same, let's say, intellectual wave. We would therefore very much appreciate an exchange of ideas with you on this topic, an exchange that might perhaps be the principle of a future collaboration, including both essays on and photographs of our work in the architecture publication which you direct. Our second article in the February issue of La Rassegna Italiana, which we eagerly await, will address contemporary foreign architecture from the point of view of internationalism. Should you be able to give us some interesting documents in these regards, we would be extremely grateful. So you can see the tone is really complimentary, and he's trying to get, let's say, Gropius be in a sort of a mutual alliance to support on the international scene the young architects. These are some of the magazines that I mentioned before in which the letters from Milan by Carlo Rava were published, and most of all, very early on the 8th of February of the same year, Gropius answered Carlo Enrico Rava letters, accompanying the letter with the reproduction of a drawing for the Totensiedlung and some photos of the Bauhaus with a benevolent note. He says, "I'm delighted to see that our groups remain in contact." So our groups are Gruppo 7 from one side and the Bauhaus from one other side. This is a very, wonderful result of a very well orchestrated diplomacy. In addition, he says, please get in touch with the secretary of the Ring, the architect Ugo Ehring. So he has really done some sort of introduction to the circles of the avant-garde. Okay. Rava immediately took Gropius' advice, contacting Ugo Ehring, who in turn put him in touch with Henrik Mendelssohn and Ludwig Hilbersheimer, who, without hesitation, in 1928, in his Internationale Neue Baukunst, would include projects of industrial building exhibited in the Gruppo 7 room at the third exhibition of decorative arts in Monza. In short, this was the start of a very intense stream of correspondence, so an architecture made of paper, of words written on letters, and requests for clarification on the Italian situation and the group's initiatives, culminating in a letter from Siegfried Gideon, who at the moment was still editor of the Cicerone magazine, which had him sent a note promising immediate developments, as you can read. So Siegfried Gideon are announcing that a new great event is going to happen very soon in Stuttgart, which is the Weissenhof-Siedlung, to be built from the famous group of architects. And he says, he asked them to send him some of their project, because he says, Stuttgart est pour vos hommes d'avant-garde. And so, of course, immediately Rava answered, sending some of their project. Gropius' reaction was a little bit disappointing because he said, but I do not see plans of simple houses, which exactly characterize, let's say, an endemic, idiosyncratic, different approach between the Italians and the Germans. Gideon was thinking of projects of simple houses, let's say prototypes of civil architecture, social housing, and Rava was sending projects, let's say, more extraordinary projects. In fact, in the meantime, between the February and May 1927, the participation of the Gruppo 7 at the third Biennale of Monza was being elaborated, and the participation was the first effect of the improving notoriety of the group through the echo of international magazine, because even in Italy they said, okay, these young architects, we do not know them, they have built nothing, but they are so famous in German magazine and in French magazine that we must invite them for the exhibition, for the Biennale, the Monza exhibition. So the Gruppo 7 arranged a room. You see the pictures that shows the arrangement of these small rooms with models on the stacks and drawings on the walls. And the choice of these projects was determined by their adherence to the issue of industrial buildings, because, of course, the issue of industrial building was very much stressed by Gropius and was one of the main characters appraised even in Italy of the new German architecture from Peter Behrens to Walter Gropius, the Fagus work mainly. These projects were mainly a gas factory and a tube factory by Terragni, a garage for 400 cars by Figini and Pollini, and you can see here a rendering on the left and a model of the gas factory by Giuseppe Terragni. We can see that among the different trends or the different emphases of each one of the components of the group, we can clearly distinguish two main influences. One that is very clear, mainly in Terragni, is the influence of Corbusier. Yeah, you can see here even the reference to the pilotis is a mixture between Sant'Elia, because Terragni started as a futurist, and of course a clear influence of the plasticism of Corbusier. The others, especially the Figini and Pollini ones here, this is the project for the 500 cars garage. Some of the drawings, this is one. These are the models, were clearly inspired by Gropius, either because of this preeminence of glazed surfaces, for the articulation of volumes with different heights, which somehow remounts the compositional system of the Bauhaus building in Dessau. This inspiration, this constant reference to, let's say, Gropius' alternative to Corbusier was made much more clear. Well, first of all, was, let's say, highly appreciated by Ludwig Hilberseimer, who wrote this Internationale Neue Baukunst, which was a book that somehow accompanied the exhibition Die Wohnung in Stuttgart and the construction of the Weissenhofsiedlung, which you can see over there. And he gave different pages to the projects of the Gruppo Sette, significantly accompanying them with the most famous, but alas dead, architect in Italy, maybe the only contribution of Italian architecture to the culture of the avant-garde, which was Città Nuova by Antonio Sant'Elia on the other right. But the evidence of the Gropius influence would increase rapidly, because 2 years later, in 1930, when there was the fourth Biennale exhibition in Monza, in the park of the Villa Reale di Monza, Figini and Pollini, as a member of the group of the seven, but the project was mainly done by Figini and Pollini, they had the opportunity of building a prototype of, well, actually it was a pavilion sponsored by the Edison Group, which was the equivalent of the IG in Germany. So it was a pavilion in which had the main aim to publicize the rising industry of electrical appliance, demonstrating to the people, because of course the people could enter the pavilion and see all the spaces perfectly arranged in all details. So it was going to demonstrate to the audience the benefits of modernization in everyday in everyday life. So this is the main facade with the main entrance to the pavilion, where you say Società Elettrica, and on the flyer over there, you can see that the intention of Figini and Pollini was, okay, to take the opportunity of building this pavilion for the society, but as it happened with Le Corbusier, with the pavilion of l'Esprit Nouveau in Paris, they wanted to transform the occasional target of the pavilion in a sort of prototype or demonstration of a possible new way of living, a new villa, new suburban villa, although, of course, the surrounding landscape is a beautiful landscape of a park, which should have been exemplary of the new mechanical civilization and its possible relation with the nature, because it's immersed in the nature. The plan is, so here, these two images are rather suggestive of the aspect of the effects of the illumination of the building during the night from the inside, so the benefits of electricity for improving the quality of architecture, but the plan was very basic, very simple. It was a rectangular shape. It was 16 meters long and 8 meters wide, so very simple. And it was spread over 2 floors. So on the image on the right, you see the main living room with the kitchen in the background. It was, of course, an house. It was not an example of a social housing, of course. This is very clear. It was an house for middle classes with a spectacular living dining room, all unified, that almost alluded to some solution of Mies van der Rohe's Villa Tugendhat in Brno, of which some fixtures and fittings, for instance, the double glazed greenhouse, seemed almost a direct quote. However, the dominant element was the large glazed wall that recalled the transparency of the industrial aesthetic suggested by the Bauhaus factory of knowledge in Dessau. It is no accident that this feature would be soon picked up in some other following architectures by Figini and Pollini that I will show you in a little while. But there is one element in this house which is directly linked to the culture of the Bauhaus. If for culture of the Bauhaus we intend, as I understand from so many lectures of yesterday and today, a very extensive, let's say, appreciation of what has been called rationalistic or modern architecture, because sometimes we tend to reassume in the term Bauhaus the effects of a large display of experiments which are not always conjuring in the same place. And was the kitchen? The kitchen was, first of all, an experiment of one of Walter Gropius' obsession, the teamwork. Because Figini and Pollini asked the help of other architects, mainly Piero Bottoni, who was not part of the group, and they asked Bottoni to study in a very specific and detailed way the arrangement of the kitchen equipment, of all the environment, but the environment with the equipment, because the kitchen was the beating heart of the entire house, and as the German experiment in Frankfurter Siedelungen had demonstrated, the kitchen was the hardcore of its mechanization. And Bottoni showed a profound knowledge of the technique and dwelling type of the Siedelungen, and of course, in particular, of the most famous experiment, which was the Frankfurt kitchen, which demonstrated a mastery of theoretical, methodological, and technical assumption. So here you can see the plans in which he shows in a very detailed way the movement of any single element of the fixed equipment, the distribution, the movement done by the housekeeper for the performance of all action in the house, and the importance, the preeminence given to the electronic appliance for the functioning of the kitchen. So the kitchen was, I mean, if the living room was more dedicated to leisure somehow, the kitchen was exactly the art of the rationalization of the house, was the demonstration that you can be at the same time both in search of leisure and in search of rationality. It means that you have to find a balance between the two of them. But as I was saying before, this idea of the use of glassed surface, which of course retained the influence of Gropius' career from Faguswerk to the ideal factory in Köln till to the Bauhaus in Dessau, because if you think about it, it's a straight line. So it goes from a shoe factory to a factory of knowledge, but there are three examples of possible factory in industrial society. So this idea of the glazed surfaces was exactly one of the main obsession of the project that we can see in different realizations. This is the offices and print shop De Angeli Frua in Milano. A very simple, almost cubic architecture with very strong preeminence of glassed surface. In a more elaborated way, which demonstrated the influence of Giuseppe Terragni with which this work was done, was the facade of a project never realized for the School of Brera in a garden in the historical center of Milano. But you can see that the whole facade is reminiscent of the famous Bauhaus workshop facade. And at the end, in the one of the first example of Italian application of rational architecture to industrial factory, which was the Olivetti factory addition in Ivrea, near Turin, from 1937 to 1940. So it was really a very important witnessing of the possibility, even for the Italian architects, and of course for their clients, in this case an enlightened client such as Adriano Olivetti, to build something which could compete exactly with the masterpieces of German architecture. So this idea, especially in the second edition that you see here, of this sort of grandeur of the Olivetti headquarters, was in some, to some extent, the demonstration for Figini and Paolini that you could follow Gropius' ideas even after the death of the Bauhaus, but to perceive it in an Italian way. There is a quote that I would like to read of Gino Pollini, writing about the use of extensive glass surfaces in architecture. Why do we use it? He said, lucid and perfect, altering with the changes of light and shade, of the backgrounds and the reflections, glass is an element of fundamental importance in the most modern architecture. Of course, one just have to think about the glass architecture, the Mies van der Rohe experiments of 1922 on the skyscrapers in Berlin, but there is something more which he added, which gives really the flavor somehow, the taste of the Italian approach, because he says that glass is not only the place of transparency as it was in Bauhaus, but also the occasion for complex, expressive effects. In fact, he says, glass walls could also be mysterious extraordinarily decorative, which is a strange word by a rationalist to use, extremely decorative, mutable with the changing of the point of view and the landscape that surrounds them, of the sky and the time of the day. And then he adds a more clarifying quote. He says, the game of reflection thus opened the way to a Mediterranean variety. So this, the transparency of the glass is no longer a Kelvin-like mirroring of the inside towards the outside, as, for instance, Mies had stated, no? When he was writing about this skyscraper, glass skyscraper, but its glass can be a complication of visual effects, halfway between nature and metaphysics. Many years later, of course, this idea was critically reappraised by Colin Rowe when he wrote his famous essays on the transparency in architecture, questioning the possibility of intending glass only as a means for transparency, but indicating in glass also sort of deceptive surface. Another paradox of the Italian appreciation of the Bauhaus was that in 1923, in February 1923, on the number 50 of the magazine La Casa Bella, which you see, it's completely renovated in a rationalistic way, even from the design of the cover, appeared an article, a long article, written by Ivo Pannaggi, who was one of the three Bauhausler that I mentioned before. So he had been in the Bauhaus students from 1927 or 28 till to the end. So in 1922, he writes a sort of photographic and critical reportage called Architetti Europei, Walter Gropius. So as I said, he had a direct experience of the Bauhaus in itself. And of course, in this article, he focused on the novelty of the teaching body, consisting, as he says, of a core of singular artists. He mentions almost all, from Feininger, Kandinsky, Klee, Maas, Molinaggi, Muche, Schlemmer, but curiously enough, he omitted, for instance, the name of Itten. And systematically summarized all the chronicles and the story of the Bauhaus since its foundation in Weimar, which was at that time almost unknown in Italy. Accompanying his story with a beautiful sequence of black and white photographs of the school, which he called the Werkstattbau, the teacher's residence, and Siedlung-Törten, Pannaggi nonetheless played down the scope of the Bauhaus at the time, which he wrote, and I'm just quoting him. He says, the Bauhaus today, so is 1932, survives today as a school of art. It's really another paradox, because Ivo Pannaggi is an artist himself, and of course, that in 1932, the Bauhaus, under Mia's direction, could be defined as a school of arts, just or only a school of arts, seems in fact the real more an ideological criticism on the post-Gropius era than even a real paradox. And Gropius was in fact the real focal point of his description, even from the title, no? So it's Walter Gropius. The schools is fully described in one of the first attempts to reconstruct in few pages, of course, the history of the school, in his preliminary and guiding lines. In his description, in Pannaggi's description, Gropius is painted as a precursor, very different from the other protagonists of the German scene, like Pölzing or Mendelssohn, for instance, since he did not start as Pannaggi says, it didn't start from an aesthetic stance, but from a constructive aspiration. For instance, of course...
3 more minutes.
Beg pardon?
3 minutes.
Ah, okay.
Are left.
My God.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Okay. You promised more. Okay. Anyway, I will try to do it. So here you can see some other reflections by Alberto Sartoris in La Nuova Architettura about Walter Gropius' appreciation of Bauhaus and the functional architecture. But the real shift, and then I will conclude, it's another major event which was in the 1927 exhibition Die Wohnung and the construction of the Weissenhof-Siedlung together, which, as Walter Berendt could announce in his book, was definitely perceived as the battle had been won, the battle by rational architect had been won. And the Weissenhof exercised a very profound influence on Italian architecture. First of all, as you've seen, Gideon had invited the Italian architects to attend the exhibition, and some of them did. But most of all, it was a sort of architour obliged among the young architects to visit this wonderful modern new city. But the most evident consequence of Italian architectural debate was the fifth Triennale, which for the first time was held in Milano, in what is called today the Palazzo dell'Arte. Here you can see some of the pictures, vintage pictures, which shows the Palazzo, the garden of Parco dei Sempioni, and most of all, the white spots all over are 24 examples of new prototyping, new housing. Gio Ponti was the director and the spin doctor of the exhibition. So Gio Ponti decided to reproduce the effect of the Weissenhof, reproducing from the hill of Stuttgart in Germany to the plain of the Parco del Sempione in Milano. Of course, the only difference was that in Germany the houses were meant to be a permanent heritage of the city, as they still are, while here they were ephemeral pavilions. A major exhibition to German architecture and mainly to Walter Gropius was held inside the galleries of the Palazzo dell'Arte. And among the different pavilions, we can see, for instance, the youngest generation, BBPR, not even graduated, with this house for weekends, very extravagant, beautiful but extravagant, and Figini e Pollini with a villa for an artist, which pays a very relevant homage to the Barcelona Pavilion and Villa Tugendhat by Mies van der Rohe. It's a patio house, so it's the transferring of the Miesian transparency in the Mediterranean climate. But the interior of these houses shows a clear evidence in the furniture of the very quick way in which the Italian had reacted to the novelties of Stuttgart. We remember that the first bench chair by Marcel Breuer was shown in Stuttgart, so very soon we can find Italian prototypes in the interior of these villas. So it was quite a very speed reprisal. But from the other side, there was another, let's say, strains of architects led by Giuseppe Pagano mainly, who intended the approach to architecture more, let's say, the way Siegfried Gideon had guessed Italian would do. Let's say new architecture, rational architects should be mainly, should have a social vocation. So they were experimenting these houses with an iron frame. So the house was shown while it was built up in order to convince also the producer that a very quick possibility of adopting rational system was possible and also economical. And of course, Griffini, Bottoni, and the others, they all tried to make experiment in building elements of, say, of case popolari, of social housing, on which they reproduce it, try to reproduce on a smaller scale, on a more economical scale, all the efforts of making rational the space of the house inside. So here you have a lot of examples that I have just to run up. Till to 1936, which marked the utmost of the appreciation of rationalism from Bauhaus to Milan. In the 6th Triennale by Giuseppe Pagano, we can see some pieces of rooms and prototypes of housing. This is a house for 4 people, for instance, by Albini and others, in which all the rational system that was mainly used by Gropius. So it's like the Gropius attendance to Stuttgart with the 2 prefabricated houses, which was completely diverse from the exceptional plasticity of Le Corbusier, the 2 houses by Le Corbusier. So the same dichotomy is transferred in Milano. From one side, the appreciation of architecture as a social art. From the other one, the possibility of escaping let's say, what they call the chains, some of them called the chains of a very hard rationalism, which was very soonly going to be identified in the, let's say, hardest core of rational architecture, reproducing a sort of debate that has been already discussed today with Hannes Meyer, Walter Gropius, and so on and so on. So we could say at the end that before I stop here, that before, let's say, in 1951, the famous book by Walter Gropius, La Bauhaus by Giulio Calargan, appeared on the Italian and international scene. The Bauhaus was still part of a history which was somehow readable through physical documents, architecture, witnessing, and so on and so on. So it was a sort of reaction. But in the climate of the after-war, with a general climate, general mood of Italian architecture and Italian society, feeling guilty for what had been committed during the 20 years of fascist regime and the compliances of architects to the request of fascist regime, a sort of new auto da fe was requested to the architects. So it was born the so-called the new realism, to come back to a very hard and poor reality. And the book by Giulio Calargan was the exact manifesto of the construction of a myth. Walter Gropius went out of the history, although he was still alive, but he became a myth. The Argan Books is a book with no note. Yes, it has no note. No, it's not based on historical documents. It's based just on a sort of literally ideological reconstruction, because what Argan is going to sustain is that we have, among the quarrel between the aesthetical approach and the social approach, we have to partake Giuseppe Pagano figure. In fact, he overlaps Argan to Giuseppe Pagano, and the myth of the Walter Gropius and the Bauhaus was born. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε το Fulvio Irace για την ανίχνευση αυτή των διασυνδέσεων μεταξύ Bauhaus και Ιταλίας, που ήταν, νομίζω, ένα πολύ αναγκαίο συμπλήρωμα της προηγούμενης συνεδρίας, που αναφερόταν σε γεγονότα μετά το Δεύτερο Παγκόσμιο Πόλεμο. Συνεχίζουμε με τον Νίκο Μαγουλιώτη. Ο Νίκος έχει σπουδάσει αρχιτεκτονική ιστορία και θεωρία στο ΕΜΠ και στο Όσλο. Τώρα βρίσκεται στο Ομοσπονδιακό Πολυτεχνείο της Ζηρίχης, στην ΕΤΧ, και εργάζεται ως βοηθός στο Ινστιτούτο Ιστορίας Θεωρίας Αρχιτεκτονικής και επίσης εκεί εκπονεί και την διδακτορική του διατριβή architecture, print culture, and uses of the past in modern Europe. Θα μας μιλήσει με θέμα το παλιό σύστημα που δουλεύαν οι μαστόροι στα μέρη της Ανατολής, η οικία Κόντογλου και η μεσοπολεμική φαντασίωση για ένα βυζαντινό Bauhaus.
Καλησπέρα, ευχαριστώ. Καλησπέρα. Ζητώ συγγνώμη για την αλλαγή, αποφάσισα να τα πω στα αγγλικά. Like many have before me over these 3 days, I will try to stretch the genealogy and the chronology of the Bauhaus a bit further. I'm going to talk about a Greek case, which is not a direct, let's say, does not have a direct link to the Bauhaus. I would more characterize it as a delayed echo. But before I do that, I have to begin with the source and with a well-known passage from 1919. Quote, "The art schools of old were incapable of producing a unity of the arts. They must return to the workshop. So let us create a new guild of craftsmen, free of the divisive class pretensions that endeavor to raise a barrier between craftsmen and artists. Let us create the new building of the future that will unite every discipline, architecture and sculpture and painting." So this is how Walter Gropius introduced the Bauhaus as a counter-paradigm of artistic education, aiming for the synergy of the arts through the precedent of the medieval guild. From the arts and crafts to the Bauhaus, one of the basic theoretical constituents of modernism was a renewed interest in the Middle Ages. For Gropius and many others, the new building of the future had, at least on a symbolic level, the form of a medieval cathedral, constructed collectively by craftsmen and artisans. Now, in Western Europe, this idea has an extensive prehistory throughout the long 19th century, which related to the gradual thematization of medieval art and architecture, first as a symbol of nationhood, and then as a model for the reformation of artistic education and production. In Greece, however, the equivalent process of a discovery and acknowledgement of the local medieval heritage of Byzantium encountered significant obstacles. For most of the 19th century, the attention of Greek architects and artists was monopolized by classical antiquity, and Byzantium remained a marginal and conflicted topic. Now, Byzantine architecture finally became the object of systematic study in Greece in the 1880s. Through the efforts of the theologian and archaeologist Georgios Lambakis and the Christian Archaeological Society that he founded, Byzantine art and architecture were accepted as national heritage, but they were not yet seen as the vehicle for a modern reform of the arts. As other historians have shown, like Dimitra Kotula, in the 1890s, members of the English Arts and Crafts Circle exhibited great interest in Greece's Byzantine monuments. But there is no evidence of an equivalent Greek discourse at the end of the 19th century. In other words, although the two sides of my slide share impressively similar beards, the nationally and religiously charged rhetoric of Lambakis had little in common with the utopian socialism of figures like William Morris. Greek architects and artists aligned with the long-developing medievalism of their European peers rather late, in the 1920s and 30s. A large majority sought inspiration for their modern designs in vernacular architecture and folk art. But there are certainly also cases of Greek interwar architects and designers who used their Byzantine heritage in a way that echoed the modern medievalism of their European peers. Most famous example on the slide is Aristotelis Zachos, who used elements of the Byzantine and post-Byzantine tradition to create buildings that aspired to the idea of the total work of art, or the Gesamtkunstwerk, in the spirit of the contemporaneous German avant-garde. But instead of Zachos and other known examples of interwar Greek Byzantinists, I will focus instead on the house of the painter and author Fotis Kontoglou, built in Athens in 1931 to 1932. This is Kontoglou, how the lens of a photographic camera saw him and how he saw himself. So the house is a case that is rather known, or Kondoglu is a case that is rather known within art history, but his house is less discussed within architectural history. But I see it as a good example of what I try to call a Byzantine Bauhaus, or the fantasy of a Byzantine Bauhaus. So, born in 1895 in Ayvalik in Anatolia, Kondoglu moved to Athens in 1913 to study in the School of Fine Arts. But he soon abandoned his studies and traveled to France, Spain, and elsewhere, where he undertook various artisanal and artistic occupations. In 1922, he settled in Athens and began working parallelly as a novelist, an illustrator, and a painter. Opposing academicism and specialization, from a young age, Kondoglu represented the ideals of erudition and the interdependence of the arts. His early writings demonstrate a strong influence of modernist currents, particularly of primitivism. Kondoglu expressed a strong disregard for modern Western civilization and a preference for primitive, exotic themes. In his book Pedro Casas in 1920, he worked on ideas of exploration and hermetism, while in Vassanda, in Taxidia, Travels, and in Astrolavos, he constructed his own universe of themes, characters, and places, eclectically derived from other books or from his own travels. Although Kondoglu's later work would be monopolized by Byzantium and Orthodox Christianity, in his earlier years, his frame of reference was broader, but above all, emphatically primitive and oriental. In his writings, the distinction between the described primitive figures and the author is often so blurred that it resembles a psychological complex. Kondoglu was fascinated by all sorts of noble savages or hermits, and at the same time he understood and presented himself as one, as somebody who lived far away from the modern condition and was indifferent to academic knowledge or intellectual discussions. Of course, the reality was quite different. In the interwar years, Kondoglu belonged to a large circle of intellectuals, artists, and academics, to whom he certainly owed much of his knowledge about art, history, and Byzantium in particular. Although Kondoglu presented his trips to the monasteries of Mount Athos and Meteora as ascetic retreats from the modern world, we know that these were quote-unquote places of pilgrimage for many intellectuals and artists who went there to study their art and architecture. In Athos, in Mistras, and in Athens, Kondoglu became familiar with Byzantine art and architecture, not only traveling alone, but also working with other painters, archaeologists, and architects, restoring monuments and curating museum collections. Although Kondoglu participated in this local academic discourse, in his texts he described Byzantine monuments with the same romantic amazement that he expressed for more distant places. Contrary to the more sober writing style of his contemporaries, such as Zachos or Anastasios Orlandos, Kondoglu wrote about Byzantine churches in an emotional and colloquial style, mixing history with local lore and assuming the role of an untrained, curious traveler. His description of the monastery of Osios Lukas in Viotia in 1928 is a good example of this. Kondoglu spared little importance to the history of the building or its overall architecture, and focused mostly on a close observation of its details. His understanding of Byzantine art came mainly through an identification with the medieval craftsmen and artists that made it. Looking at the handcrafted decoration of the church, Kondoglu wondered about how many builders, stonemasons, and carpenters must have worked on it, and how many years it would have taken them to complete the work. And observing the frescoes of saints on its walls, he pointed out the subtle stylistic and technical variations between them. He noticed the subtle individual expressions between different painters, but simultaneously admired their homogeneity and their faithfulness to Byzantine tradition. In Greece, as in other places, this tradition was seen as the antidote to the conservatism and disciplinary divides of modern academies. In this context, in 1930, Kondoglu founded his own school workshop, a small informal group of apprentices who learned from him worked individually but also collaborated with him in larger projects. Kondoglu's reputation as an unconventional artist attracted young students from the Fine Arts School, who saw him as the provider of a rich extracurricular activity. In Kondoglu's workshop, the simulation of the medieval guild often went as far as reproducing the closedness of such formations. When the young painter Yannis Tsarouchis, he is seen on the picture on the right, he is on the left. When the young painter Yannis Tsarouchis showed Kondoglu his portfolio, the painter rejected him by saying, "I thought you were a simple kid who drew traditional images, but I see a well-informed youngster who's copying Parisian models." Although this critique, as Tsarouchis himself said, devastated his bourgeois confidence, Tsarouchis insisted and was eventually accepted as an apprentice. Again, the apprentice is the word that Tsarouchis used to describe this story. Now, the spirit of Kondoglu's workshop was eloquently manifested in a painting that Tsarouchis made in 1931 titled Greek Crafts. Drawn in an emphatically Byzantine manner, it depicts human figures within a natural landscape exercising different crafts: pottery, weaving, shoemaking, etc. The image is composed in a way that, as we see, obscures the modern date of its making. No sign of modern tools or materials, only a loom, hammers, paintbrushes, etc. And this is, of course, amplified by the use of pre-modern painting techniques, lack of perspective, and standardized Byzantinesque features for the landscape and the human figures. But Tsarouchis had detached this Byzantine aesthetic from its religious context, and he used it to express a modern vision of the interwar generation, the revival of traditional crafts as the way towards a locally rooted and yet modern artistic production, an idea that certainly echoed contemporaneous European movements. And as the medievalism of the international avant-garde was translated to the local context, this symbolic image of the arts for the Greek interwar generation acquired an emphatically Byzantine texture. And perhaps it bears reminding that 3 decades later, Tsarouchis would make a similar symbolic image for an equally modern, far more modern institution for the Georgiadis office, which is the mosaic that is in the entrance of the museum. So Tsarouchis' painting was the preamble to a more elaborate project made by Kondoglu's guild. The following year, 1932, saw the completion of Kondoglu's own house in the Kypriadou neighborhood in Athens, a project that resulted from a collaboration between Kondoglu and his students, and the building that would accommodate his unconventional school workshop. Now, the house originally consisted of only the ground floor, and it is, as we can see, it almost resembled an anonymous vernacular house, a rather humble appearance, one would say. But inside it stood an elaborate large mural which expressed a more idiosyncratic artistic vision. Painted by Kondoglu and his students, this mural was again an attempt to extract the Byzantine and post-Byzantine fresco tradition from its religious context and to place it within a modern residential interior. Its general structure and style simulated the murals of Orthodox churches, but its iconographic content had little relation to religious themes. It depicted the heterogeneous universe of figures, events, and scenes that captivated Kondoglu's literary imagination. Exoticized savages from Brazil stood next to sea captains from his native Ayvalik, and historical events were juxtaposed with biblical scenes and mythological stories, all unified under a Byzantinesque style. Above this idiosyncratic history and geography of the world, Kondoglu placed an equally personal selection of figures from the history of art and intellect, philosophers, writers, artists from antiquity until the Middle Ages, and from Greece to Egypt, all painted to resemble saints or prophets of art and culture. With the exception of 2 Greek painters from the 16th century, any reference to the Renaissance or later periods was completely absent. Kondoglu was declaring that his frame of reference was exclusively pre-modern and predominantly Oriental. The only reference to the present was a portrait of Kondoglou and his family, again in the same Byzantinesque style. Under this portrait stood an inscription which, although not as striking as what surrounded it, condensed the ideological essence of the project. So having seen numerous such inscriptions in churches, Kondoglou was able to reproduce their typical formulation in order to present the people involved in the making of the house as the members of a traditional companion of craftsmen and artists. So he begins by saying this mural was made by Fotis Kondoglou from Ayvalık in Asia Minor. He was helped by his father, Athanasios Hadjikambouris, who was his father-in-law, and his apprentices, Yannis Tsarouchis from Piraeus and Nikos Engonopoulos from Constantinople. Together with them, Kondoglou credited other artists and intellectuals who contributed to its artistic conception. But despite Kondoglou's aforementioned admiration for all sorts of craftsmen, the workers that built the house were not mentioned in the inscription. It is clear that this group of people was far from a medieval guild and equally far from bridging the gap between artists and craftsmen as the Bauhaus Manifesto had called for. I think I will have to, okay, no, I have 2 pages, I can do this. So, yes, the project was the impersonation of a traditional traveling companion of craftsmen by a group of intellectuals with a specific urban context, the neighborhood of Kypriadou, which at the time was home to several intellectuals and artists. At the end of the inscription, Kondoglou wrote that the house was made by the Georgiadis, Kimon Laskaris from Lamia. Laskaris was an architect who, after studying and working in Paris, had just returned to Athens and was hired by Kondoglou to design the house. To incorporate him in his medieval fantasy, Kondoglou gave him the title of Georgiadis, a term that stems from Italian ingegnere, but in Byzantine years meant master builder. We know, however, that this master builder had also a few years later designed emblematically modern projects, and this points to the fact that Kondoglou's Byzantine fantasy and the local architectural modernism of the 1930s were not incompatible. They developed simultaneously and often involved the same people. Now, at the peak of his attempt to present his project as traditional, Kondoglou declared that the mural was made with the old system that was used by the craftsmen in the places of the Orient, a system that was nowadays scorned because people have lost the taste for simple art. Kondoglou was certainly echoing the medievalism of movements like the arts and crafts and the early Bauhaus, but within the regionalistic atmosphere of the interwar years, he could not have simply admitted his affinity to similar attempts abroad. So he implied a general opposition to the modern West by placing his roots in a vague, supposedly traditional Orient, a somewhat exoticized, heterodetermined notion of the East, which, again, he had largely inherited from the West. Now, with a difference of about 13 years, Kondoglou's inscription echoed the medievalism of Gropius's Bauhaus Manifesto, and of course it amplified it in a somewhat performative manner. What I have tried to show in a nutshell is the following. Despite its figurative and graphic style, Kondoglou's mural was fueled by some of the same ideas that generated the white, undecorated interiors that make up the canon of modernism and the Bauhaus. And despite the regionalist overtones, the efforts of Kondoglou and his contemporaries in Greece for the re-evaluation of the artistic heritage of Byzantium were not a local particularity. They were the result of an interaction with modern international currents. In other words, and to conclude, it takes a cosmopolitan worldview to become a regionalist and a modernist mindset to act like a medieval mystic. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ τον Νίκο Μαγουλιώτη για αυτή την εντελώς απρόσμενη τροπή που παίρνει η κουβέντα μας. Φτάσαμε στο τέλος του συνεδρίου μας μετά από 3 κοπιαστικές, πολύ εντατικές μέρες, στις οποίες όμως μάθαμε πολλά, τουλάχιστον Εγώ αισθάνομαι έτσι, να έχω μάθει πολλά, πάρα πολλά. Πράγμα που οφείλεται βέβαια στην συμβολή όλων ημών και ημών. Αρκεί κανείς να σκεφτεί ότι 60 εκλεκτοί συνάδελφοι και εκλεκτές συνάδελφοι χρειάστηκαν ώρες, μέρες προετοιμασίας για να μας παρουσιάσουν τις δουλειές τους αυτές τις μέρες. Για να συλλάβει κανείς τον όγκο του υλικού το οποίο παρουσιάστηκε εδώ. Το θέμα μας ήταν το Bauhaus και η Ελλάδα, όπου από την πρώτη στιγμή η πρόθεσή μας ήταν όχι μία ενδοσκόπηση, ομφαλοσκόπηση, αλλά να δούμε την ελληνική εμπειρία στο φόντο της παγκόσμιας. Και πράγματι αυτό που φάνηκε εδώ με πολύ καθαρό τρόπο, πέρα από τις ελληνικές διασυνδέσεις του Bauhaus, ήταν ότι το Bauhaus είναι πράγματι μια παγκόσμια υπόθεση. Ξεκινάει από το Σικάγο, τη North Carolina και τη Βοστόνη και φτάνει μέχρι τη Μόσχα και την Καλκούτα, με ενδιάμεσα περάσματα από την Ιταλία, την προπολεμική και τη μεταπολεμική, μέχρι το Eretz Israel, και φυσικά τοποθετείται στο κέντρο πάλι η Ελλάδα, κατά ένα μυστήριο τρόπο. Νομίζω ότι αυτό που πετύχαμε ήταν πρώτον να αποφύγουμε τις παγίδες της μνημειοποίησης του Bauhaus, που πράγματι είναι συνηθισμένες σε τέτοιου είδους επαιτειακές εκδηλώσεις. Ακόμα νομίζω ότι αποφύγαμε μία λάθος επικαιροποίηση του Bauhaus για την εκπλήρωση κάποιων άμεσων επιχειρησιακών στόχων. Αυτό γίνεται ως συνήθως και πράγματι έτσι έγινε και εδώ, με την ιστορικοποίηση του Bauhaus, δηλαδή την τοποθέτησή του μέσα στο πολιτικό, κοινωνικό και οικονομικό του συγκείμενο. Φυσικά, δεν καλύψαμε όλες τις πλευρές και τις πτυχές, όλα τα ζητήματα τα οποία ανακύπτουν από τη διερεύνηση αυτής της ιστορίας. Υπάρχει έρευνα δεκαετιών πάνω στο Bauhaus και πιστεύω ότι θα συνεχίσει να υπάρχει για αρκετές δεκαετίες έρευνα. Πιστεύω ότι όλες και όλοι εσείς μπορέσατε να αποσπάσετε ορισμένα ερεθίσματα από τις τρεις αυτές εντατικές μέρες, που ελπίζω να σας χρησιμεύσουν για την έρευνα που πρόκειται να ακολουθήσει. Εκ μέρους μου, πάρα πολλές ευχαριστίες. Το λόγο έχει ο Ανδρέας Γιακουμακάτος.
Καλησπέρα και από μένα. Φτάνουμε μάλλον στο τέλος αυτού του μαραθώνιου, του τριήμερου μαραθώνιου, που το περιμέναμε να είναι έτσι, του 12ωρου κάθε μέρα, όπου ακούσαμε περισσότερες από 60 ανακοινώσεις, μια πολύ μεγάλη πορεία γνώσης, σκέψης και στοχασμού γύρω από αυτό το τόσο σπουδαίο φαινόμενο της παράδοσής μας του 20ου αιώνα. Ομολογώ ότι το συνέδριο είχε και μια αναθεωρητική διάσταση, αρκετά αξιόλογη, αρκετά έντονη. Ωστόσο, ποτέ κανένας μύθος, έστω και αν είναι μύθος, δεν είναι τυχαίος. Υπάρχει μια πραγματικότητα και μια αλήθεια ακόμα και στη διάσταση του μύθου. Και βέβαια το ζήτημα δεν είναι αν το Bauhaus ήταν σημαντικό ή δεν ήταν σημαντικό. Το ζήτημα είναι ποια θα είναι τα ερωτήματα που κάθε εποχή θα θέτει απέναντι στον Bauhaus για να πάρει τις απαντήσεις που την εξυπηρετούν για το δικό της χαρακτήρα νεωτερικότητας. Έτσι. Άρα λοιπόν το Bauhaus, όπως και να έχει το πράγμα, θα είναι πάντα μια πηγή ερεθισμού διανοητικού και διανοητικού κινήτρου για να σκεφτούμε για τη δική μας συνθήκη σήμερα. Και δεν είναι τυχαίο λοιπόν ότι το Bauhaus σε κάθε τέτοια συζήτηση για την κουλτούρα του 20ου αιώνα βρίσκεται στο κέντρο των συζητήσεων, είτε ήταν ανεξάρτητα από το αν ήταν ένα, από το αν ήταν πολλά, για το ποιες προσωπικότητες ήταν οι πιο δημιουργικές, για το ποιες προσωπικότητες ήταν πιο συμβιβαστικές. Αντίθετα, αυτού του είδους οι αντιθέσεις είναι οι αντιθέσεις που εμπλουτίζουν τη δημιουργικότητά μας, ως ανθρώπων δημιουργικών, κατά συνέπεια ατελών, έτσι όπως ατελές ενδεχομένως ήταν και το Bauhaus. Γι' αυτό είναι και τόσο ενδιαφέρον. Είχαμε λοιπόν αυτή την ευκαιρία να ακούσουμε πάρα πολύ σημαντικές εισηγήσεις των ξένων που μας έμαθαν πολλά, ημών που μάθαμε πολλά στους ξένους, φίλους μας και φιλοξενούμενους, στο πλαίσιο αυτής της τόσο ερεθιστικής και πάντα δημιουργικής ανταλλαγής ιδεών. Και πιστεύω με αυτή την έννοια ότι το συνέδριό μας είναι από τις σημαντικότερες συμβολές φέτος σε διεθνές επίπεδο για την ανακατασκευή της εικόνας του Bauhaus, της ιδέας του Bauhaus και της αλήθειας του Bauhaus. Νομίζω ότι υπόθηκαν πολύ αξιόλογα πράγματα, κατατέθηκαν πολλές σημαντικές ερευνητικές εργασίες και εργασίες που είναι σε εξέλιξη. Όλα αυτά έχουν τεκμηριωθεί καταρχήν, έχουν τεκμηριωθεί κινηματογραφικά και θα παρουσιαστούν στα κατάλληλα sites και στις κατάλληλες πηγές από όπου όλοι θα μπορέσετε να δείτε κάθε ημέρα 12 ώρων εργασιών και μουσικών δραστηριοτήτων. Θα τεκμηριωθούν με τα πρακτικά που θα βγούνε ανθρωπίνο σύντομα, όπως είναι η δική μας συνήθεια, να μην περιμένουμε 5 χρόνια για να εκδώσουμε πρακτικά. Όπως ξέρετε, το κάνουμε πολύ πιο σύντομα. Θα γίνει λοιπόν αυτό στις ανθρωπίνως δυνατές ταχύτητες και διαδικασίες, και έτσι λοιπόν θα έχουμε τη δυνατότητα να ξαναδούμε, να ξαναδιαβάσουμε στις γλώσσες που παρουσιάστηκαν στο συνέδριο. Όλοι οι σύνεδροι είναι καλό να γνωρίζουν ότι θα έχουν τη δυνατότητα να ξαναδιαβάσουν τις ανακοινώσεις τους και να μας ξαναστείλουν ενημερωμένες και εμπλουτισμένες, αν και ήδη τις έχουμε, όπως ξέρετε. Έτσι. Το συνέδριο αυτό είχε και την ιδιαιτερότητα να εμπλουτιστεί και να συμπληρωθεί από τις 2 μέχρι τώρα αριστουργηματικές ομολογουμένως συναυλίες που παρακολουθήσαμε και που ήταν μια εμπειρία ζωής, σε ένα χώρο μάλιστα ο οποίος αποκτά μια τελείως διαφορετική διάσταση. Δεν είμαστε στο χώρο του music hall, της αίθουσας συναυλιών. Έρχονται οι μουσικοί να παίξουν εκεί που εμείς έχουμε τη δική μας δραστηριότητα, οπότε υπάρχει μια μετατόπιση της εμπειρίας και μια εξοικείωση της εμπειρίας για το κοινό, και αυτό είναι εξαιρετικά ενδιαφέρον, ακόμα και για μουσική που δεν είναι εύκολη, όπως η μουσική του Χίντεμιθ, η μουσική του Μπουζόν, η μουσική του Στραβίνσκι. Πολύ πιο κατανοητή ενδεχομένως είναι η μουσική του Κουρτ Βάλ και του Georgiadis που θα ακούσουμε απόψε εδώ σε λίγο. Το συνέδριο πλουτίστηκε και από την μνημειώδη, επαναλαμβάνω, το έχω ξαναπεί, έκδοση του βιβλίου των σχολικών κτηρίων, που πιστεύω ότι είναι μια συμβολή πάρα πολύ σπουδαία για την ελληνική ιστοριογραφία, για την ελληνική έρευνα και κυρίως επίσης για την διαδικασία της προστασίας αυτού του πολύ σημαντικού αποθέματος σε ευρωπαϊκό επίπεδο σε ό,τι αφορά τη δεκαετία του 30, της παραγωγής του μοντέρνου, μιας τυπολογίας συγκεκριμένης, έτσι όπως αναπτύχθηκε στην Ελλάδα της δεκαετίας του 30. Νομίζω λοιπόν ότι εδώ μπορούμε να ολοκληρώσουμε, να είμαστε έτσι αρκετά ικανοποιημένοι από ό,τι έγινε μέχρι σήμερα. Εγώ θέλω να ευχαριστήσω, τις ευχαριστίες τις είπαμε στην αρχή του συνεδρίου αυτού την Πέμπτη και ήταν πλήρης. Θέλω να ξαναευχαριστήσω όλους τους συνέδρους και τις συνέδρους, Έλληνες, ξένους, αγόρια, κορίτσια που ήρθαν εδώ στο συνέδριο να μας πούνε τις ιδέες τους. Να ευχαριστήσω την Επιστημονική Επιτροπή, να ευχαριστήσω την Οργανωτική Επιτροπή, να ευχαριστήσω τους χορηγούς μας θερμά. Και να ευχαριστήσω και τον Σοκράτη, με το οποίο δουλέψαμε πάρα πολύ. Το ξαναείπα από κοντά, από μακριά, αλλά πάντα τόσο αποδοτικά και τόσο ουσιαστικά. Σοκράτη, δεν ξέρω αν έχεις κάτι να πεις. Μου ανταποδίδει τις ευχαριστίες ο Σοκράτης, οπότε ευχαριστούμε όλους εσάς. Σας προσκαλούμε να παραμείνετε εδώ στο χώρο, γιατί σε περίπου μισή ώρα ή και κάτι παραπάνω θα ξεκινήσει η συναυλία και σας ευχόμαστε καλή συνέχεια και καλό καλοκαίρι.